Hello and welcome to the Last Word on Spurs. We are, of course, your multi-award winning Tottenham Hotspur podcast. We're back. We are closing in. We are into the final week of the transfer window as that tumbleweed rolls past me as much and as soon as I say it. If it was for the very, very first time, you can find us. We're on iTunes, we're on Spotify, we're across all major audio platforms. We're, of course, on X, we're on Facebook, we're on Blue Sky. We're across all social media platforms. And yes, I have made it out of Mrs. Marinakis' yard to bring to you yet another edition of Last Word on Spurs, where we've got a very, very special guest joining us, where we're going to have a real good deep dive into all things Tottenham, of course, including where we are in the transfer window. Don't just fall over as soon as I say that. Helping me on this show, he's been with me for a lot of the summer. We've tried to be adaptable. We've tried to be flexible. We've tried to give him some time off and rest him up. But we are now into that final week and things better start getting busy. Jim is back from Oso Spurs. Jim, love to have you alongside me. How are you, mate?
I'm good, doing good, thanks. Look, 2 wins from two clean sheets, and I'm still optimistic some stuff's going to happen at the end of the window. So, and look, I'm on with George as well. That's class. So I'm good, thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. I've got to say, this man, I've known him for the last 7, 8, 9 years. And along with covering the club, he's probably one of the most level-headed people I know, individuals that you get a good gauge if you need to try and at times remain calm, like right now in a transfer window. So what the hell is going on? I'm delighted to welcome back to the show long-term friend of mine, the brilliant George Sessions, back from PA. George, love to be joining us, mate. How are you? It's our routine 6-monthly check-in service to make sure we're all still okay, mate. Love to have you here.
Oh, thanks so much for having me back on. I would say I'm good. I'm pretty stressed at the minute. I've got an 8-week-old baby. That's amazing, but I'm moving house this week. So and Tottenham are not really helping with this transfer window. But Thomas Frank's won a few games, so that's given me a bit of a boost. But now I'm doing all right, to be fair. Not and it's lovely to be back on. Hopefully, I wish we had a few more players to talk about in terms of incoming Spurs.
Yeah.
But no, it's good to be back on.
Likewise, mate. Love to have you back alongside us here. Look, of course, we are going to give you an overview. Don't laugh when I say that about what is happening so far in the transfer window. I know, like George has said there's a lot of degree of frustration out in terms of how a lot of Tottenham fans are feeling right now, because at the moment, Tottenham have only got one senior permanent deal over the line so far this window in Mohamed Kudus. And quite frankly, we do need to do more. You know, I think it's been made very, very clear from the fact that we have got potentially ahead of us a 60-game season that quite evidently, if Thomas Frank is going to fight on those 4 fronts that Daniel Levy, Vinay Venkatesham spoke about in that rare interview they gave only 2 or 3 months ago, then he is going to need to have a huge amount more support in this final week of the window if he is to somehow do that. Now, in terms of the latest news that we're going to bring to you in terms of the window, and then we're obviously going to discuss really where we've been over the last year or so, because we've got George on with us, like I say, and we've not had that chance to speak about George with it. Just we do bring everybody up to date in terms of really the latest news. We have had some breaking news in this last 24 hours that we understand Yves Bissouma is closing in on a move to Galatasaray, which I think won't be much of a surprise. I think Yves really has fallen down the pecking order, it's fair to say, in this last 3 or 4 months, certainly since Frank's arrival at Tottenham. Obviously, he was, as we know, disciplined for ill-time keeping. And the fact of the matter is now it looks like he's closing in on a move away from Tottenham. And that, of course, does potentially free up a squad space. What does that mean in terms of players coming in? Well, again, it's been a day where we have heard certain speculation in relation to Tottenham maybe going in for Lucas Paquetá of West Ham United. Can Tottenham really take a second player away from West Ham in one window, given the pressure at the moment on West Ham manager Graham Potter? And also, along with that big news for the day we are hearing is that Fabio Paratici is going to return to Tottenham full-time in the month of October. And what would be really a big move for Tottenham in terms of the backroom shuffle? How would that work? Would it mean that he can work alongside Johan Lange? Would he be replacing Johan Lange? We'll have a good chat about that and what that does mean for the backroom staff at Spurs and how that merry-go-round would work. And again, we're here 24 hours on. Very little news in terms of movement over what would be a record signing of Savinho from Manchester City, where at the moment, from what we are hearing reported, a lot depends on City's progress with Rodrigo and whether Real Madrid would let him go. So we'll be coming on to that and more in this transfer window. Can I just say again, a massive thank you to all the incredible support we've had for Last One on Spurs over this last month or so. I've had over 1 million views, which is quite simply remarkable. Thank you so much for sticking by us, for tuning in that you do relentlessly, if it's daily or weekly, wherever you find the time around. Busy life out there. We greatly appreciate it. We're in store for yet another cracking show with a cracking guest alongside me and Jim. So if you can, guys out there, please hit the like button. Please hit the subscribe button. And again, hit that notification bell so you're aware every time we're going to go live. George, it is lovely to have you here. Like you said, I know for us, football should be seen as an outside distraction for what life is like. But I know right now, Tottenham are doing anything but distracting us, if we're going to be honest with you. I mean, I want to get your take on what you've made of the summer so far, because look, as I mentioned to kind of open there, just the one permanent signing so far in Mohamed Kudus. Don't get me wrong, good quality player. I think we can all safely say that we'd love to see that type of quality being again dished out to Frank in terms of additional signings towards the end of the window. Coach Sakai has come in, but at the moment he's injured. Again, remains to be seen when he will feature in a Tottenham shirt. The clubs that you would say Tottenham already were in the case of trying to chase down the likes of Man United. They spent above nearly 200 million. Brian Mbeumo coming through the ranks. Matthias Cunha coming through. They've of course got Benjamin Sesko over the line. You look at of course Man City and what they've spent so far. Big money for them as well in this market. They've got deals done. Liverpool, you know, Hugo Ekitike, their latest in a long line of transfers, along with the 100 million plus signing Florian Wirtz. They could still go in as well for Alexander Isak. And then we look at our North London rivals, Arsenal, that following the sign of Victor Gyökeres, have since looked like they've hijacked us twice. Once for Eberechi Eze, another time, of course, for Pierre Hincapié. How would you sum up? That's before I even mentioned Chelsea's business, what Chelsea have done. Pedro, Gittins, Delap. How would you sum up, the window from your perspective? Because again, you've got an interesting role. You covered Tottenham, of course, for PA. You're a regular on the Tottenham Way podcast as well, we've got to say. Tottenham hat on, maybe journalist hat off. What have you made? Or combine them both for us. What have you made of this window so far? And we'll get you off mute. Or you might have to unmute you if you're okay to do so.
Yeah, sure, mate. I said to Thomas Frank on Friday, you know, do you feel you've been let down by this transfer window? Because I said to him, that's the view of the fans, and that's certainly the view of myself. You know, he signed 2 players. You know, I don't like including Kevin Danso and Mateus Tell in this list because they joined in January. They're not new players, are they? So Spurs have signed Paulinho, who looks very, very good. I'm happy with that signing. They've signed Mohamed Kudus, who looks very good. Again, happy with that signing. But they sold Sonny. So Mohamed Kudus is essentially a like-for-like in terms of a wide player coming in to replace another wide player. And we also know that James Maddison's now going to miss the season pretty much. And Dejan Kulusevski's out until, you know, sort of the end of this year, 2025. So Thomas Frank said on Friday the squad's probably a similar level to last season. I would say maybe it's actually weaker. And Spurs are now not playing Europa League football; they're playing Champions League football. So it's, I think it's hugely poor of the club to be in a position where we're a week out. You know, Thomas Frank is soon going to have the juggle of Sunday, Wednesday, Saturday football, and the squad is no better than it was last year. What they're clearly banking on, you know, they obviously want to make more signings, but what they're clearly banking on is that Thomas Frank is going to be so much better than Ange Postecoglou at juggling 3 games a week. And I think that's a poor thing to be hedging your bets on, because as good as Thomas Frank's CV is, he's never had to do that, not to the level of the Premier League and Champions League. He's barely managed in Europe. So to suddenly think, you know, he's going to be the answer, you know, by putting him in, everything's going to be rosy, is extremely, as I say, poor, I think. So the window has not been anywhere near as good as it needed to be. And I really hoped, you know, Spurs winning the Europa League and beating Man United to this kind of 100 million game as it was built up, getting Champions League football, it would be a sliding doors moment for the club. You know, they'd realise this is our chance. We were almost out of Europe completely and potentially on for a really, you know, mid-table kind of, you know, middling time for the club. And now they're back in the Champions League. Let's spend the money we need to. And we know that the money's there to spend. You know, they were ready to spend 60 million on Morgan Gibbs-White. They're ready to spend more than that on Eberechi Eze. Hopefully they do bring in someone of adequate quality during the next week. But to have 2 players through the door, because I don't really count Kota Takai as a guy that's going to really impact the first team just yet. It's really disappointing, and I can completely understand why the fans are frustrated. Especially when you see the other big six rivals spending the money they have. You have to compare Spurs to that, and this is all in the same summer when it's been said that Spurs want to compete on four fronts and not just compete, but eventually win the Premier League and Champions League. No, it's completely. It's been a really poor window, I think.
It is really frustrating because I feel like Spurs are nowhere near as bad as we thought we were at the start of the season because of scarring from the year before. But the feeling is I feel like we can go from being good to being great, and it's within our grasp to like motor away from Newcastle and Villa, who almost took our spot temporarily in those places. And if we sleep on it, it's going to be twice as hard to get back ahead of them again another time. But positives are if we were to beat Bournemouth, we've almost gotten away with the slow transfer window as long as we did get a couple of players in. And leading to the games themselves, George, it was 2 wins. We scored 5 goals. Like Thomas Frank in general, like how have you found him as a coach coming in? And has that kind of changed your feelings about the season ahead in terms of the football, parking transfers for a second?
Yeah, Thomas Frank has made a brilliant start. I thought the performance against PSG, first of all, was really, really impressive. Spurs should have won that game, really, the way they played and the position they got themselves in. But, I think a lot of people would have been fearful it was going to kind of be a 3-4, 5-0, as we've seen PSG do to plenty of teams over the last 12 months. So that was a really good start. And then the 2 wins in the Premier League, 2 clean sheets, you can't complain. I guess the big thing with Thomas Frank that's kind of struck me, and I did expect it, but it's still really been brilliant to see is the adaptability. 3 different kind of game plans for each of those games. I really thought it'd be a 3-5-2 at Man City because he tried that before and it worked so well, and he didn't go down that route. 4-2-3-1, 4-3-3, whatever you want to call it. But that kind of the sort of the whole plan that he come up for that was really, really impressive. So he's made a really good start, and he's definitely earned this opportunity to be in charge of one of the so-called big 6 clubs. He did brilliant work at Brentford. The only thing is this is honeymoon period, isn't it? I'm generally quite positive, but there's not loads of positivity streaming out of me. I don't think Thomas Frank's going to be another Nuno. Even when Nuno was winning those early games, I was a bit fearful of the way we were playing. I like the way we look under Thomas Frank, and you said it yourself, Jim. I said it on our the Tottenham Way podcast last week. This team, Tottenham have got a really good starting team, and it's just that kind of, I think 11 to 14 players are really, really good. We can match anyone. We literally showed that, but beating Man City. It's just that kind of, the next kind of 6 players that are going to be on your bench. They're just not the level, and the Super Cup showed that really. Thomas Frank took off João Paulinho, Mohamed Kudus, put on Archie Gray, who I really like, but isn't obviously at that level yet, and put on Matthias Tell, and we couldn't, our level dropped, and PSG took advantage of it. So it just kind of shows you Spurs are not that far away from having a really good squad, actually. And I certainly think these young players are going to get better, but just add a little bit more to it, and I think you'll really see a difference from, as you kind of alluded to, Jim, competing with Villa, Newcastle this season, and maybe others, they're going to come in. Brighton, I'm sure, will improve, a few others as well, to actually, trying to get that 5th spot. Because Man United have spent a lot of money, but we don't know how really they're going to look under Ruben Amorim. He could easily be sacked in 2 months, the way Man United do things.
Yep.
So 5th is kind of there as an opportunity if Spurs can pull their finger out, but we've got a week to go to see if they're going to give Thomas Frank the tools he needs and the tools he deserves, to be perfectly honest. First summer, he should have more than just 2 new additions.
I have to ask you on that point, George. The fact of the matter is that, I think we've all been clearly impressed with Frank in his opening 3 games. You've sat in the presses with him post-match. What do you make of his mood when you are challenging him on those questions around the transfer market? Do you find that he is as fairly calm and composed what he seems on camera to us as being 10 feet away from him, or maybe less than that, what you are in those auditoriums? How have you found him in terms of when you're asking him about transfers? Do you sense any kind of agitation or frustration he hasn't been given more back in today?
No, it'd be hard to say that I can sense he's frustrated with the lack of backing. He's certainly got a lot of questions on Friday about transfers, and it was kind of, all different angles, and he handled them pretty well. He did cut in at one point when someone said, if Spurs don't sign anyone, and he said, well, you're saying if they don't, but they might do. But no, he's been pretty good. I certainly noticed a little bit of a difference with him from the Brentford days. I can't confess to have done loads of Brentford press conferences, but I did do my fair share during their kind of 3-4 years in the Prem, and he was always absolutely fantastic. Really would go into so much detail, and I definitely noticed the first handful of press conferences at Tottenham. I think it was just loads more people asking questions, just a much busier room, more difficult questions than he's going to get at Brentford. And he wasn't quite as relaxed, I would personally say, as you would see at Brentford. But that's so normal. He was at Brentford for so many years. Of course, he was completely comfortable in that environment, and he'd just come to a new environment. But I think he has settled into the job, very well, actually. And it wasn't an easy task for him to, replace Ange Postecoglou, as much as he obviously split the fan base. And I was firmly, obviously, in the Ange camp. But if anyone doesn't know, he did win the trophy. So Thomas Frank
Get that in early, G. Get that in early.
All the listeners will sort of log off now, wouldn't they? But no, Ange won a trophy. So it's an unusual situation, isn't it, for a manager to come in when a guy has just won a trophy, and the first one in 17 years. So I think the way he handled that was very classy. I thought I liked the kind of messaging he put out to do with Ange, and kind of acknowledging what had been achieved last season. And the kind of hope is, obviously, as Spurs fans, whether you use Ange out, Frank in, Frank out, we all want Thomas Frank to come in and build on kind of that platform. And he has kind of got a chance to, but we now just want him to be backed and given a real fair crack at it, because it really should not be underestimated what winning a trophy should do to this squad. They now know they can get over the line. You've got 20 clubs in England. Only a handful of those squads right now currently know they can get over the line. So this is such a key moment, I feel, for Spurs. And you talk to kind of the guys that were in the 80s team. I think it's Graham Roberts that said it. Once you've won your first trophy, you're 50% closer to the next one. So I've really kind of sensed this is kind of could be a brilliant time in our history if we can get things right off the pitch.
Yeah, there was similar to George. I think trying to remember back to the madness of last season. I think we actually started following each other on X because we were one of the few left going like, no, I still believe. I'm bought into the stories and all that.
And I was on following.
But there certainly was moments, I think, even us, like, who were staunchly in, like, and it's, by the way, like, Frank, what an appointment, what a guy, really happy with him so far. But was there like a moment last year where you were a bit like, I really can't blame Spurs if they go and get someone like Thomas Frank? Was there like a moment that you felt that?
I probably wouldn't go that far. I mean, my kind of faith in Ange, I'll be totally honest, I did always think he was going to win the Europa League. And if anyone doesn't believe me, my season predictions back in August, I put it out the other day. I did have Spurs to win the Europa League. I just had this feeling that he could do it. My faith wavered probably around the time of the Chelsea incident, when we obviously had the cupping of the year, which obviously Ange kind of said it, what he said with that. And I kind of wondered then, oh God, if Spurs start poorly against Southampton, it can get toxic. And then we've got Frankfurt. I think it would have been Frankfurt at home was the following Thursday. And I was thinking then, oh God, this week could be kind of make or break for him. If he ever has a couple of bad results, he probably could go. Because I think that was kind of the feeling. I think as soon as it went wrong in the Europa League, the club probably were at that point going to make a move. I don't know that for sure. It's just that was the feeling around the situation.
Yeah.
But we've kind of, with Ange, I guess where I always had faith is that I felt Spurs really close to being a really good team before those injuries kicked in November time. Everyone sort of, I really didn't like the statement the club put out, I'll be totally honest, when Ange was sacked, highlighting all the kind of Premier League stats that, are not including the first 10 games, just kind of like that doesn't count. people forget he won 15 out of 22 last season in the cups.
Well, he was also 10 unbeaten at the start of the season, and again, people know that I'm not, no disrespect, I was in favour of a change, but you also can't look upon what he did do, because I mean, look, we've started very similar, and it's very similar parallels to the fact that Ange, I think we all know, should have really been given a lot more back in the same way. Frank should be given more back in the same way. I go back to other managers, George. This is what it is, right? It's everyone's faced with this kind of toolbox to try and make this work.
Well, last summer he got given 4 teenagers and Dominic Solanke to compete with Thursday, Sunday football.
The only
and then with 2 extra fixtures. So my always frustration was when Spurs won at Man City 4-0, which was obviously an incredible result. Spurs had won 10 out of 14 at that point. And everyone talks about how Spurs were never consistent under Ange. Well, he just started to juggle September, October, November, that kind of grind. And then obviously the injuries kicked in, and then Vicario, Van der Ven and Romero, I think they didn't play with each other at all between October the 30th and March the 13th, the RZ home game. So it's like 3.5 months where you're missing your first choice goalkeeper and your 2 centre-backs playing together. Of course you're going to struggle. And I think, now there won't be a Spurs fan out there that will say, you know what, Ange, I wish you'd prioritise the Premier League when it comes to February and March time, and you'd tried to get us to finish 11th and let us get knocked out of the Europa League. Everyone who's in their 20s, who's in their 30s, will say that Bilbao was the best day of their life supporting Tottenham. Absolutely. Even probably guys in their 40s might say that, because the FA Cup in '91 maybe that's kind of a close one, but before that they would have had sort of 7-8 years without winning the trophy. And I always just kind of come back to he actually is the one that did it. Mourinho didn't win the Europa League. Pochettino didn't win the Europa League. Harry Redknapp didn't. Conte didn't win the Conference League. So it does kind of frustrate me when fans kind of paint him in a bad light, because he's given us one of our greatest moments in our history. And I get that that he wasn't perfect, but by all means, and yes, certainly some of the injuries, the Van der Ven and Romero setbacks in that Chelsea game. The blame sort of does fall at his feet, but I didn't think they were all his. It's certainly not his fault. And Thomas Frank's got some injuries now, by the way. So no, it does frustrate me a little bit, the way the sort of lens that Ange is viewed, because I just think this was a guy that made a really ballsy decision in January, February time to say, we're going to do everything we can to win the Europa League. We're going to make 7 or 8 changes in every Premier League game. We're going to protect Romero, protect Van der Ven. And it paid off, and it's given us, arguably the greatest week we've had as a Spurs fan, winning in Bilbao, then having the parade 2 days later. So, I've obviously, massively Ange. I did want him to get season 3. I'll be totally honest. I kind of felt like he'd started to show signs he could adapt and he could change with the way we played in the Europa League. So I think he would have learned a lot from last season in terms of juggling the players better. But we didn't see season 3, unfortunately.
By November, we had Davies, Dragusin and Forster as starters. And if Frank was put into that situation where your defensive options are Davies, Gray, Forster and Dragusin, I think the anger would be pointed less so at the manager and more so at the situation they've been put in, where they're playing 3 times in a week with that. And that's their best they've got. I can't even rotate those options. But yeah.
I think that's why, again, Jim, to come on that point that you come back in, I think that's why now we see the frustration we're seeing right now from Spurs fans, because I think we all know that with the way Thomas Frank has started, Jim, like you said to George in your opening monologue, I think it'd be deeply, deeply a massive disappointment if they don't in these next few days. And we're going to come on to the tools that he needs, give this man the best possible chance of success, because we do know, guys, we all know this because we've seen it how many years watching Tottenham, that the situation being, as soon as we step in to that routine of Premier League, Champions League, week to week, and you suddenly start throwing in the Carabao Cup, the FA Cup, the 11, as good as the 11 is on his day, and which we saw against Man City, it's a good 11. But we know that 11 can't be used every single week. It just can't be. And I think that's where, Jim, I'm sure, Jim, you can also, I mean, we were both saying, you were saying this to me, we need more. We have to have more, don't we? We need to be able to give the manager the tools to succeed. And I think that's the thing. When you've seen what he's done already, 3 games in, like George said, 3 different formations, 3 different systems, barring 5 minutes against Paris Saint-Germain, it's been quite simply remarkable. Remarkable, Jim.
Yeah, it is. It is, and he's done brilliantly. And I all in on Frank. Really, really like him. I feel, even though this window is frustrating, we have at least gone in. And isn't defending this window, by the way. If you're listening, I think unless we sign 2 more senior players, we've not set Frank up for success. So that is my expectation. And 3 would be where I sit as that's giving Spurs and Frank the opportunity to be in the top 4 again and start to build on that. And that's what your expectation as a Spurs fan should be. That's absolutely fine. But I feel like at least this season we have started. We didn't even have a start with Danso last season, and he's just going to be absolutely vital depth for us in the squad. Takai, it's hard to say because we don't know if he's going to be a kid that needs a lot of development or not. But Berryvale and Gray as well are another year along development-wise, so they are better players than they were a year ago. I think when we first signed Berryvale, you'd have thought, what are you doing chucking you into starting 11? Whereas now you're quite okay with that being something that happens. And obviously Kudus has been a really good signing, and Richarlison finally being fit helps as well. So I feel like we've got enough depth to kind of get through the first 5-10 games okay. But it's when you get to that January period, isn't it? Everything's December, everything's stockpiles. That's when you've set someone up to fail if you don't add those 2 or 3 other more signings. So yeah.
Agree. Look, it is a fast-moving show. We are going to squeeze in already our first break of it because we do need to, I think, already, given the time against us, turn our attentions to what Tottenham do need to do in these remaining days of the transfer window. We have got over nearly 10,500 of you that are watching us live. Thank you so much, as always, for your incredible support for Last Word on Spurs. I'm joined by Jim over at Oso Spurs, doing some great stuff over there. Please make sure you go and check him out. You're probably thinking, I have heard this man in the pressers, this voice that asks the questions. He is on here again. Like I say, we have our 6-month check-in service with Jules Sessions over at PA. And I know, Jules, the thing I always say to you is you've got a really great way, I've said to you before, mate, in terms of always asking the questions that I think the fans really want to know. And it's always a tough thing being a journalist, because I know probably for you guys, you get inundated from fans with, why haven't you asked this? Why haven't you asked that? Why can't you ask this? And we know it's not as easy as that to frame the kind of question that us fans would love to hear the answer from. So to try and obviously find a time for all you guys in there, it's not easy. So again, on behalf of all of us, I want to say thank you, because I know, again, it's not easy, that job in trying to get that question that we all want to know. So look, again, thank you so much for that support. Keep liking, keep subscribing to the show. Let's discuss where we are right now with Tottenham with a week to go in this transfer window. And I'm going to ask you from your perspective, G, what we're hearing at the moment in terms of what Tottenham are still looking to do. I'm intrigued to know whether you feel these are the right areas they're targeting. You know, I think from what we were gauging, I think Ali Blessing put out a piece recently on this, that they were looking to bring in, you know, ideally a winger. They were looking at hopefully bringing in a potential centre-back with a belief that Luka Vuskovic would benefit from a loan with regular first-team football. And, of course, this desired number 10. You know, this number 10 that we've been chasing really all summer, obviously following those injuries to Maddison, which is going to rule him out for what looks like majority of the season. Obviously, no Dejan Kulusevski for the turn of the year. Is that what you think, G? If we were to try in these next, 6 days now left for our listeners on audio, if we can bring in a centre-back, because we know now Hincapi appears to be off the table, looks like he is heading to Arsenal, another one we've missed out on. If we can bring in a number 10 and a winger, do you think we've given Frank the best possible chance of success, or does it all come down to, surely, the calibre of the player we're bringing in? Maybe not the position, right? That's going to be key.
It's all about the calibre, I think, isn't it? You know, Spurs don't need to sign squad players. They need to sign guys that are either going to start or they're going to be the first kind of option off the bench. And yeah, those 3 positions have been the target positions all summer, really. That's the kind of the frustrating part. I wasn't sure if they would get another centre-back because Radu Dragusin is very close. I think to coming back. I don't think you're gonna see him on the bench, you know, maybe over the next couple of weeks, but I would certainly sort of think come maybe end of September time, he's potentially ready to get minutes. So then you've got kind of, you know, Dragusin, Danso, Ben Davis. I think clearly number 10 is the priority position. You know, Thomas Frank wanted 2 number 10s at the start of the summer. You know, hence why they went so much for Morgan Gibbs-White, because James Maddison was fit then. You know, we're now in a position where Spurs have no number 10s. Now, you'd think they've surely got to sign somebody that either is a number 10 or is can play number 10. So potentially Savinho, I guess, can play as a 10. I don't think that's exactly his favoured position. Obviously, more on the left, and it was obviously playing the right a lot last season for City. But they need to sign a number 10. You can't go into this season and kind of just rely on Mohamed Kudus playing through there and Paquetá playing there and Lucas Bergvall sort of filling in for the first 5-6 months, especially with the 8 games of Champions League group stage that Spurs are going to get. They're going to have 6 of them, September, October, November, December time. So they need to sign a number 10, and it needs to be a real top quality number 10. I'm sure you're going to come on to Lucas Paquetá. I think, of all the options I've seen mentioned, I think, I probably would. I think he would kind of fit the bill. Brazil international, lots of experience, European experience, albeit I don't know how much in the Champions League, whether he played in the Champions League for Lyon. But yeah, Spurs they've got to sign. I think they need to sign at least 2, really, because you're not setting Frank up to handle that kind of grind, because it is going to be a grind. We've seen it every single time. We saw it under Conte, saw it under Mourinho, saw it under Poch. It takes so much out of the squad, and Spurs are just not going to be able to give 4 competitions a real fair crack at the whip, I think, if the squad stays the same or if they just bring in 1. But I do fear at this point, with 6 days left, how much work can they really... I don't think they're going to get all 3. Sorry to sort of dampen the expectations, but I just can't see a way where they're going to get all 3.
Where's the time for that? Where is the time, G?
Exactly.
Well, partly because we've been so close, but so far from, 2 in particular. I feel like Morgan Gibbs White is a bit of an isolated incident in its own kind of bucket of why. But Eze, I think you get to a point where you feel, this is happening and it's just a matter of when. So when everything unraveled on that whole situation, it didn't happen, and especially where he ended up going, it hurt even more. And then I think Hincapié is another one that you just, like, every Spurs fan who's looked into him's gone, that's the player at the back we need. That others gives that left wing back cover, gives the centre back cover. That's great. That gives, and then once again, he ends up at the club that, the last club we want to see him at. Like, with those not happening, all those 3, George, like, what have you kind of made of it? Because it's quite a lot to get our heads around, isn't it? Because it's not just, they're all kind of quite individual circumstances, but all equally frustrating in different ways. What have you made of the 3 that didn't happen?
Yes, it's been embarrassing for Spurs, hasn't it? I would kind of give him a pass on Hincapié. Clearly, that's a player they've been interested in for a long time, because he was being sort of spoken about when Ange was there.
Yeah.
And I'd imagine, I'm sure this summer they've really sort of looked into him, and maybe even as recently as the last couple of weeks, they were sort of weighing up whether to bid for him. I think that I would imagine they've kind of obviously got wind that Arsenal are going to come in for him, and wisely, from my point of view, they've decided not to go head to head with Arsenal for another signing, because if he's given the choice, he's going to pick Arsenal, as painful as it is as a Spurs fan to say that. So I don't think Arsenal necessarily hijacked that one. I've not sort of heard it was really, really close, and I know there's some sort of reports about Spurs putting a bid. I've not been told that myself. It sounded like Spurs were obviously looking at him, but recently I don't know. I haven't been told that a bid had actually gone in for him. But the other 2 guys, Morgan Gibbs White massively stung Spurs, and I kind of really feared. Clearly they triggered the release clause. Hallelujah, we've been wanting that for a long time. I was actually told only 5 people knew about that release clause. Morgan Gibbs White, his agent, Marinakas, the current sporting director at Forest, and the previous one. So, like, loads. I know sort of people that have worked at Forest in the past, and kind of really, really key people at Forest had no idea about that release clause. They were kind of banking on about 80 million coming in for Morgan Gibbs White this summer, because I was told Man City had bid 70 million for him earlier in the window, and they were, the Forest kind of team were kind of thinking they're going to get 80 million for Morgan Gibbs White, and then they can reinvest and boost the squad. So Spurs obviously went with that release clause, which was, produced a big saga, and then Morgan Gibbs was, seemed like, I think his personal situation came into it a lot. Clearly his wife was heavily pregnant. There's a lot of stress involved, and I don't think anyone can really blame him for deciding at that point, sort of pursuing a move to a different city is, during that time is not maybe the best move to do. And then obviously sign a new contract. But I just kind of, the worry and the big concern I had after that is that everyone knew that Spurs had 60 million just ready to go on ice. And then from that point onwards, every single club that Spurs went for, and we kind of saw this a little bit with Eze, Spurs went in for Eze and Palace wanted a bit more money, and Palace wanted a bit more money. And, maybe Spurs should have just triggered his release clause, which was very public and everyone knew about, and then Eze would be a Spurs player. That's where my frustration on the situation is with the club. And I guess with Daniel Levy being the figurehead of the club, there was a release clause there. When you decided Eze was your man, you should have put the money down and got that done. On the Tottenham Way podcast, Tom Walnut said it was amazing that Spurs had a free run at Eze.
For a week.
It was a one horse show.
For a week.
Yep. How did they get so lucky to have that opportunity? So, and it's true, it really is. He's such a brilliant player, and I've covered Palace for a couple of years. I've wanted Spurs to sign him for so long. Yeah. And he's a brilliant human being. He's not going to be treated probably like that when he comes to Tottenham with Arsenal. He's going to get a lot of pelters, but he's actually a brilliant human being, and I think he would have been brilliant for Spurs. But clearly he was also undecided on the move. You would say, given everything that's come out since. So they, certainly the Eze one, I think Spurs deserve the criticism they're going to get for that one, because I think they could have, the release clause was there. They could have made him a Spurs player if they'd gone for that release clause. Morgan Gibbs White, a bit more into it, I think, with the personal circumstances. But again, it kind of, the real frustration I have with all these instances, just the time it's taken. Morgan Gibbs White, the bid went in on the Thursday or the Friday, and then 2 weeks later it signed a new deal. What happened during that 2 weeks? I think Ali Gold put a really good detailed report, and same with Jay Harris, saying Spurs had actually bid again. But at that point, they've got to move on as well and be sounding out other people. I think that's where the club can be criticised. And the same for Eze. Eze as a saga was pushing 10, 11 days. And again, Spurs have sort of missed out crucial time to get stuff right. So I think that's where the frustration comes in. They've wasted a lot of time this summer, and that's not even mentioning, the whole taking 2 weeks to sack Ange and then a whole week to appoint Thomas Frank. There's 3 weeks that they missed out at the start of the summer. That was always going to be a costly error. I obviously thought Ange should have been backed, but if the club didn't, they really should have sacked him a couple of days after the season. It's brilliant being sentimental, but it's wasted Spurs a lot of time. He could have got Thomas Frank in a whole week and 10 days earlier, and maybe we wouldn't be in this situation we are now.
George, can I ask you on that point before Jim comes back in, just very quickly? We've mentioned those couple of high-profile failed transfers, and what you would want, I think, fans would want to see is a board or a chairman that's learning from his mistakes. And the problem is we've been here for so many years. I mean, I've known you, mate, for nearly a decade. Personally, I've known you for such a long time. During our time supporting Spurs, and Jim will remember this as well, because I don't know age Jim too much. We've been here over, Moutinho, Willian, Bruno Fernandes. There is so many cases where we've gone in for talks with higher profile players, and for one reason or another, they just simply haven't got done. Would that again be the massive concern, that there doesn't appear to be any kind of learning that's going on from these high profile mistakes that we've made? And to make 2 of them in one window, and then in the process of that, you've got the chairman going on to the Overlap documentary saying, when we enter negotiations, that's where it comes to me. It's like an own goal, isn't it? I mean, it's just like, it is remarkable. And that's why, again, I did an interview with TalkSport a week or so ago where I was heavily critical on just the manner of how those negotiations have taken so long to get done. And even now with the whole Eze thing, where you're hearing, or certain reports out there from the Athletic that have said at the 11th hour, Eze contacted Arsenal to say, are they going to come in? But we did have a free run, like we said, for a week. So it's just, I just, would that be a worry, Jules? The lack of learning, and it does feel, again, I've said this time and time about Tottenham. a lot of the signings that we've made over the last few years feel really opportunistic. Richarlison at Everton, some PSR problems there. Brennan Johnson at Forest, some PSR problems there. Kudus West Ham, some PSR problems there. Ironic, the big one we're going to come on to shortly, Savinho, that would be against the grain, if you see where I'm coming from. What do you take on that for me, G? Am I overanalyzing that, or have I got a point potentially on that?
Yeah, no, it's fair. You've got a point. I just think in all works of life, time kills deals. And that's been an area where you've got the pros and the cons of the approach Spurs have to running the club, which is, I don't think you're ever going to worry about us being in a PSR issue or getting deducted points for financial regulations. But on the flip side, and you're not going to see us in a situation like Man United's, but on the flip side of that, the lack of urgency behind certain decisions just leaves you left behind, because if you don't want to move quickly, you open the door for someone else to take that opportunity from you. And the longer you wait, the longer the crack in the door is open, the more people are going to see it, and the more people are going to think about, opening it and going for it themselves. So you set yourselves up for these situations. And I guess we've got such a long, because we're a bit of an anomaly in the league that we've had the same, ownership for so long. Most clubs don't have over 25 years. No one else does like us. That we notice more the patterns, and we know our owners better than most clubs do. And we've got a longer history to draw back on and go, this reminds me of that time, and this reminds me of this time. So, yeah, and then you see we're going to catch on it later, I think, but when you see like all these new faces coming in, Vinay, Langer, Paratici apparently as well, like you kind of go, yes, like, we've been heard. These positive changes are all here. They're all coming. And then suddenly a ghost of the past comes up and you start to doubt whether those changes are going to live up to be what you'd hoped. I think that's just compounded the frustration, and it compiles more when you can predict what's going to happen this season. You can predict the piling up in fixtures in November and December and predict I told you this would happen. We really needed X. And then it's that whole thing of, save a penny, spend a pound, isn't it? And I think like quite a few times we've been in the camp where you could argue that's what we've done. You don't take the move now and then you miss out on a few league positions in the next round in a cup. You're like, well, we've paid for it in another way. So it just does make it quite frustrating. I was going to ask George a bit about because with Vinay coming in, Langer coming in, Paratici, like these are all football people, right? That's a positive shift. But do you see with these people coming in, do you feel the heat's going to be on any of those people in particular in this situation? And do you see much kind of evolving and changing as time goes on with those people in the club?
Hard to say, isn't it? I mean, how many good people have worked at Spurs over the years? It's easy to forget Spurs had Paul Mitchell in the building. Even Paul Barber, was at Spurs at one time. In Michael Edwards as well. They've all sort of worked at Spurs and moved on and then done brilliant work elsewhere. I guess with Johan, clearly, I think the jury will be out on him for a little while. Some of the signings, Lucas Bergwijn in particular, absolutely brilliant signing. I think especially for the money. But a lot of the other kind of signings, it's hard to say whether they're hit or miss at the minute. I sort of have a similar feeling with Fabio Paratici. I've never been kind of fully on board the Paratici train. Obviously brought in some great players in that first spell, Romero, Kulusevski, Bentancur. But he did have a lot of misses as well that people sort of forget. Golini was meant to be Spurs' number one when he was brought in. And Brian Hill's obviously been a bit of a disaster, hasn't he? I think that being polite.
He is now our second longest serving player, George.
Really? Wow.
Craziness. Absolutely craziness. But
only
I think
Tottenham.
What I would say is, is a positive from the Paratici point of view. I mean, clearly I've just been speaking about, and we'll have, is Paratici always was spinning plates. He was always spinning plates during that first spell. And he has been a consultant for Spurs during the time he left. So, he's still been involved in the process. But he, obviously when he was the main man, if Spurs couldn't get option A, if they couldn't get option B, there was C, D and E available. And sometimes that was a negative because we saw some of the signings Spurs made over the years that they weren't always great. But there wouldn't be this kind of lack of proactiveness, I would say, when Spurs miss out on someone if he is in the building. And it's been sort of the elephant in the room for a long time. He's often kind of spotted just behind us in a box near the press area, not in a Tottenham box, so to speak. So he's not there in a club capacity. He's there as a guest of others. But interestingly, he was at the Super Cup sitting next to Johan Lang. So it's probably not a bad time for Johan Lang to be getting in with Fabio Paratici. But obviously they would have worked with each other over this little period of time when Fabio has been a consultant. And I think they could actually work together, to be honest, because Johan can kind of focus more on the kind of data side, and I guess the targets and who Spurs should be going for, and Fabio's job will be kind of to actually broker the deals and to get them over the line, because he's got brilliant contacts.
Yep.
So I think it does make sense, I guess, from that point of view. But yeah, will anything change? I don't know. I mean, in fairness, having said that, I have heard very, very good things about Vinay Ventukashan. I know he did brilliant work at Arsenal, certainly from a comms point of view, in getting the message across to fans and kind of fan engagement. It was a huge loss. It was sorely missed when he left Arsenal. So many people spoke so highly of him, and that's really notable when he'd spent such a long time with that club. When you're at a club for such a long time, it's probably very easy to make enemies. But he was sort of like left, being lavished with praise. And I've already spoke to kind of certain, without sort of giving stuff, I've spoken to certain people that have already spoke with Vinay, that kind of work with the club, loosely is probably the best way to say it. And he doesn't really need to be sort of reaching out and speaking to those people, and he pretty much did from week one of the job. So I know for a fact he's reaching out to loads of different people in the Spurs sphere, official, unofficial, trying to get a better gauge on things. And as much as I kind of winced when Daniel Levy did the interview and ended it as he did, talking about we have to win, or we want to win the Premier League, it was. We need to win the Premier League. As much as I thought that was incredibly ill-judged, given the way that past season just went, winning the first trophy in 17 years and even talking that down, Europa League's not enough. It was a real positive step from a fan point of view that we are seeing him on camera. We are seeing Daniel Levy talking, and same with the overlap interview. I don't think we learned a great deal from it, but that is what we've all wanted as Spurs fans for a long time, to see Daniel Levy on camera, to see him addressing his decisions in certain situations. So that can only be a positive, and clearly Vinay has come in, and that's happened immediately. So I would like to be positive about Vinay and say, actually, I think he can make changes at the club if he's allowed to. And he was also brilliant with the Arsenal women's team, so it'd be really exciting to see what he could potentially do with the Tottenham women's team after they had a tricky 24-25 season. So yeah, I'm positive on the Vinay appointment. I do think he'll be really good for Spurs, and I like a lot of what I've heard so far with how he has been around the place, and just seems like a really, really thoroughly top human being. And the more of them you can get into a building and higher up at football club, the better.
Yeah, listen, agree. Just on Fabio Paratici, as we mentioned in the earlier part of the show, there is again a report from Ben Jacobs, friend of the show, that there is expectancy for Fabio to return to Spurs once the window shuts and lead the recruitment team. We know, as George just said, there he's been a consultant for the club for most of the summer. The return is being called hypothetical or potentially speculative, but as things stand, Paratici is to start an official club role in September, October. So that will be interesting to see after that window is shut, whether that would be alongside Johan Lang. Would it be replacing Johan Lang? We saw the two, of course, at the Super Cup final together. It does feel like a real important next 4 or 5 days for Spurs, where we've addressed already a couple of the sagas that we had to go through. And I do think we need to move it on to one at the moment that is dragging. So I'm going to take us a little bit forward. And I know, again, me and Jim will probably cover this off, both of us, in two different aspects to it. I have to ask you, George, about Savinho, because we spoke about earlier about the amount of time that's been spent on transfers to date. We said the fact that we spent 2.5 weeks really around the transfer of Morgan Gibbs-White. Another, week and a half so far of Eze. This one is already approaching 2.5 weeks, nearly 3 weeks. We don't appear, it seems, to be making any real progress as to, is the player getting closer to a move to Tottenham? Is he going to stay? I mean, there's been suggestions in the last 24 hours, for those that are unaware of this, that the hopes of now convincing Man City to sell Savinho rest on City signing Rodrigo from Real Madrid. Now, we'll just at the same time, because I know we're being bombarded here on this show. We understand Spurs have also held preliminary talks with, and this name again has been around for so many windows, Adrian Rabiot. I mean, George, you'll know as well as me, we've had this name on so many different occasions. Apparently AC Milan and Villa also have held talks for the player. I mean, this goes back, a friend of mine, Jamie Brown, 2018, he was linked with Tottenham. Where are we in your mind? I know I'm going for maybe two different kind of positions there, George, but with Savinho, do we know if Man City have shut this move down and said, no, he's not for sale, and are Tottenham still trying to entice a move? Or by the fact Tottenham are still in some form of dialogue with City indicates that there's a willingness to sell? I mean, we don't seem to know, G. What do you make of this?
I think it's hugely concerning that this move hasn't accelerated since Saturday, because my kind of belief was always that Spurs and Man City would get that game out of the way, and then we would see talks ramp up, just kind of to avoid the kind of awkward nature that could have occurred if Spurs had signed Savinho last Wednesday and then he scores the winner of the Etihad. It's also obviously not a good look for Man City. So I always anticipated talks ramping up this week, and I think it is a big concern that we've now got to Tuesday night, and there seems to clearly there's been no progress. That's not a shock. It makes sense for Man City not to want to sell him unless they can get Rodrigo from Real Madrid, and his future certainly has seemed uncertain. But he started on Sunday against Rabiot Oviedo. So he sort of went from being completely out of the cold to being played by Xabi Alonso. So I'm not certain that he'll be leaving Real Madrid this window after all. So if he doesn't leave, it seems like Pep Guardiola really wants to keep Savinho. And I guess kind of understandably so. He's only 21 years old. He had a pretty decent first season in the Premier League. Hell of a lot of assists. He has 13 assists in the Premier League. And he's clearly a really talented player. My kind of concern with this move from the outset was that Spurs are just kind of, signing another player with potential rather than a kind of ready-made player like we've seen with Kudos and with João Paulinho. But where we're at with the window, with the people we've missed out on, bringing in Savinho would be a massive lift for the fan base, for the club, for the team. And it would be another South American. They've got quite a nice kind of group of South Americans developing there, and they sort of bring all of them are really important players, to be fair, for Spurs. So I think it would be really good if Spurs could do this deal, but with the time running out and the way that we've not seen any progress this week, I'm a bit down on this move, to be honest. I struggle to see this really accelerating over the next 6 days. It's such a small amount of time with such a big amount of money. It does seem like Spurs want to pay the money, but City are not budging at this minute in time. They're only going to budge if they can bring someone in. Pep's not going to weaken his squad. He obviously wants to get people out, but not someone of Savinho's quality. So it's kind of a domino effect. You're kind of waiting for Real Madrid to give the green light for Rodrigo, and then City may give the green light for Savinho. But again, you're relying on sort of parts. There's a lot of uncontrollables in there, which is what concerns me, and is why I'm not so positive as I maybe was a few days ago that this deal could be one that Spurs would be able to do.
Switching back to number 10s, kind of a second, because we've tried Morgan Gibbs White, Paz, Eze. Paquetá seems to be bubbling up a bit as well. He's typically turning into a rich vein of form as we start to show interest in him. But there's not many obvious number 10 options, and over to El Canous and others. But do you think is it getting a bit complicated at this stage? Do you think to get someone of note in this late in now, or are you still kind of like quietly confident that it will happen? It'll just be later than you like.
Well, Spurs have got to sign someone. They can't, we can't go. They can't not sign anyone over the next week because there'll be riots, wouldn't there? No, with Paquetá on the surface of it doesn't make sense in terms of West Ham selling again to Tottenham. No one really expected West Ham to sell Mohamed Kudus to Spurs, but in a sense they were kind of, there's limited options for them. So from the outset, I kind of looked at this and thought, really, are West Ham going to sell to Spurs again? But it does seem like West Ham need money. I think they were banking on sort of getting money for Edson Alvarez, and he's just gone on a loan. There's a few other players they've been sort of willing to let go, and they've not got the money they want for them. And clearly, yes, they've got the 55 million for Kudus, but Graham Potter needs a lot of money because that squad needs a lot of work, and he's under pressure. So all that does play into Spurs' hands. So whereas it feels like it's a kind of gone cold and a bit dead in the water with Savinho, I can sort of see how this Paquetá one could maybe ramp up over the next week. Out of all the names out there, he's probably the one that I'd turn around and say, you know what, yeah, fair enough. That's a top quality player. If he's not starting, he's coming off the bench, and I wouldn't, if this does develop and Spurs can get him for around the 60 million mark, I think that's a really, really good signing. Don't judge him on last season. He obviously had the massive suspension hanging over his head after the spot fixing scandal. When he got a number of bookings season before last, and they were being investigated, but he did get cleared earlier this year. But that would have taken a huge toll on him, mentally more than anything over the last 12 months. But look at kind of how good and how influential he was during David Moyes' last season, which was 23, 24. I think it was sort of 15 goal involvements in around 43 games in that season. So, he's on the surface, he may not seem, as game changing as Eze, but that is a really, really top quality addition. And someone, as I said before, with European experience, Premier League proven, he's going to come in and be really, really, a key contributor straight away. So I would be quite pleased if Spurs can get that one, if that can sort of ramp up. And there definitely seems a willingness from West Ham's point of view now to actually, move him on and give Graham Potter the funds. I mean, it's the way it sometimes works, it's quite telling, I think, that West Ham are all of a sudden agreeing fees for players. They've kind of struggled this summer to sign players. I think Matthias Fernandes have been desperate to get from Southampton, and they've not had the money, not stumped up enough money to get him. But all of a sudden, this kind of last 2 or 3 days, they seem to be agreeing fees for players. So you'd like to hope that is kind of lending itself into the fact they're going to be selling a big player. And I think he would satisfy the need at number 10.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, George, I don't think we can get into this situation where we don't sign anybody, because, I mean, we do know that there's a lot of frustrated fans out there, and I think rightly so. I mean, I think not giving Frank any kind of 10 between now and the end of the window, just in footballing terms, I mean, it is football suicide, really. When I think about not having Kulusevski, not having James Maddison, and then suddenly we've got Champions League nights coming, followed by Premier League on a Sunday. That just feels very difficult to do. I mean, when you're looking at the kind of outside names as well, George, I mean, there's been murmurs. I mean, I don't know too much about the likes of Akulush in terms of his potential. Nico Paz, I mean, this one, again, we seem to have got ourselves into really complicated potential deals to do here in someone like Nico Paz that I think's got a buyback clause in the next 2 years of Real Madrid. They own a certain percentage of the player. It just feels like every kind of player that we've gone in for or tried to negotiate with has got something attached to them, which makes it very, very hard to do. And then you wonder to yourself, he may not have been on Tottenham's first or top of that shortlist in terms of someone like El Kanous. Do they go and look down, somebody like him? Do they go and look at someone like Ademola Lookman, who, for example, from what we're hearing, is being touted around by his agent in this final of the week? Do they dare and try and go back to Brentford and see, could they in any way ruffle the feathers of Mikkel Damsgaard? We know, I think now Harvey Elliott's off the table. He's in talks with RB Leipzig. And then you have had Kobbie Mainoo in this last 24 hours that has expressed an interest in leaving Man United as well. I mean, the Adrian Rabiot one has been one, again, I know it's been reported as the show is live, but this player has said, I think in the past, that he sees Spurs as being below Paris Saint-Germain. He's been linked with so many windows. I'd be stunned if that could come off. What's your gut, G, in terms of some of the names I've mentioned there? Is there any that you think as an alternative? Yeah, I could see that being viable in the next few days. And just because, again, it's how quickly they've got to get a deal done now. It's not just about even like the player profile. It's about how quickly can you go to a club and agree with it. I know people sometimes get frustrated with me saying this with Daniel Levy. I've looked at Chelsea this window. Todd Bowley's selling has been absolutely incredible, what he's done. And it just feels with Daniel that we seem to have really burnt bridges with a lot of clubs out there when it comes to negotiating. It feels like with Tottenham that every negotiation is a war. And I think it just gets harder and harder and harder to negotiate in these last few years. I don't know what your feeling is. I mean, is there anyone that screams out to you thinking, yeah, that could be, I hate to say that, cheaper option, but at this stage, someone that Tottenham could get hold of?
Yeah, come back to me on the selling point of view, because I'll forget about that otherwise. With those names you mentioned, I think Nico Paz clearly is a talented young player. I'd be very surprised if Spurs hadn't looked at him this summer. But the Real Madrid issue, but it seems like he's just a Real Madrid player of the future. I think even the Como, I think it was the owner, come out a couple of days ago and said Spurs have not bid for him. So I don't think that's not a goer in terms of, from my point of view. Ademola Lookman, I think, has been treated really poorly, actually, by Atalanta. The guy that scored the hat-trick in their Europa League win 2 years ago. Very talented player, not had the best of spells in England. But, yeah, that makes a lot of sense that he's been linked with Spurs. I think if Spurs are struggling to kind of make Savinho work, make Paquetá work, I could potentially see them going in for Lookman, just because he's an option that is there, and obviously he's well familiar with London. I think he come through at Charlton, I think it was, but he obviously played sort of more well known for playing at Fulham. So I think I could see that potentially being a late one if Spurs and there's no other options. I'd be stunned if Brentford sell Damsgaard. They've had a hell of a summer. And to sell another one to Spurs, to sort of let another kind of key figure go to Spurs after Thomas Frank, and to lose another key player would be a surprise. I mean, El Kanouche, it makes a lot of sense if Spurs want to get one back on Crystal Palace, because obviously they were very keen to sign him as Eze's replacement, and that has now hit a stumbling block. I think, if Maddison was fit, I'd kind of be like, yeah, actually, go for El Kanouche. Last season, it seemed like he had something about him. He's a young guy. I'm sure he could learn off Maddison. A little bit of, I think he played in the Champions League before for Ghent, wasn't it? So I do think he's quite a talented player, actually. I would quite like to see him at Spurs, but I don't want to now see him as Spurs is starting number 10, which is kind of the position he'd be in if he was to sign. So again, that one I'm not so mad on, really. Morgan Rogers has been sort of spoken about as well, hasn't he? But I just think the money involved in that one, I'd be gobsmacked if Spurs can somehow make that work over the next 6 days. Such a huge amount of money, and it's essentially Villa maybe giving away their top 6 spot and giving it to Spurs if they give Spurs Morgan Rogers. So again, that seems a tricky deal to do. So it's just got the time of the window. It's not going to be perfect now, and that is the frustration. It's been clear all summer. Number 10 is the priority. They need a number 10. It was so especially after Kulusevski's injury, and everyone knew he was going to be out for such a long time. It was so clear that Spurs needed an alternative number 10 to rotate with Maddison for all the big games they're going to play. They're going to play Villa away on a Sunday, Real Madrid at home on a Wednesday, and Arsenal at home on a Saturday. You can't, and you've got no one now at the minute to play those games in the number 10 role. So they've got to sign a number 10. Out of all the ones we've just mentioned in the last 10 minutes, I think Paquetá. If I had to stick my neck on the line, I could see Paquetá as the one out of all of them that would satisfy Thomas Frank in terms of a player that's going to improve the squad. Because he's spoken about that actually a little bit over the last couple of press conferences. We're only going to make a signing that improves the squad and improves the team. So Paquetá certainly would, and I think that would appease the fan base. It would sort of infuriate West Ham's fan base, but they've got plenty of other things to be frustrated about. So I'm not sure the owners are going to be too bothered about that. So he would be the one, and then maybe after that El Canus. I do like him. I just think the situation Spurs are in, he doesn't really satisfy. He's not a Champions League player, is he? Really, not yet. Anyway, he might be in a couple of years. So again, it's potential, but those two would be the ones I'd probably say I could see most likely.
We've also got some players to get rid of, though, George, as well. On top of these ones, potentially bringing in. Can you? I think when you look at 3 years ago, of our 28-man squad, we've offloaded 16 of them. So it's been quite a big overhaul, but there's still a couple lingering around. Our second longest serving, did you say, in Brian Hill?
Yeah, can't believe I'm saying that.
Being one of them. And Manor Solomon as well. He seems like a player could command a fee. Do you see either of those two getting, paid transfers at the club, in your view, before we finish the window?
I think Brian Hill, I could probably see a window where we actually has his contract terminated last day of the window, if nothing can be agreed there, which again would be a bit of a slap in the face, because God, he was sort of 21 million, I think, off the top of my head, and I think that was plus Eric Lamela. God, what we would have done with Eric Lamela over the last 4 years instead of Brian Hill. But yeah, he's got to leave. He's training away from the club. He has been all summer. Such a poor signing. So, it would make no sense for Spurs to keep him around. I don't think Thomas Frank wants people around that are not going to be part of his first team plan. So it wouldn't surprise me if he didn't leave, to join someone permanently, or potentially a loan with an obligation, if he did just have his contract ripped up on August 31st. The other one you mentioned was Manor Solomon. It's a strange one, Manor Solomon. There's kind of noises he might be given a chance at the start of the summer. I never really saw that, but just because I think he's okay in the first couple of months under Ange, and then he did very well for Leeds. But it's a big step up, isn't it, from the Championship into the Premier League. I could probably see him going back to Leeds, actually, especially because Leeds just lost so heavily to Arsenal. I'm not sure who Leeds have got this weekend, but I could certainly see a window where Leeds lose this weekend, and then they panic and sign Manor Solomon for kind of 10 to 15 million, because he's absolutely loved there. They think he's brilliant, and he will have options, and he's fit again now. I wonder if he wanted to get fit just to kind of try and catch Thomas Frank's eye, but I don't think he will be personally. I certainly don't think Thomas Frank will be turned around in a press conference soon saying he's like a new signing. I'd advise him not to if he was thinking of doing that. So yeah, I think those two guys probably will leave. And obviously Yves Bissouma, seemingly going to Galatasaray. I think every man and his dog has probably spoken about Yves Bissouma going to Turkey at some point over the last 12 months. So yeah, that does kind of fit the narrative of what everyone expected with Yves, the crazy cat, as Ange called him.
Yeah, I mean that's feel with Yves a bit of a logical move for him. I mean, I think given that recent misdemeanor with Frank, and now of course with suggestions that maybe Bentancur's could be the man that they're looking to tie down to a new long-term contract. Hopefully that would give an indication that they see him as being part of the very long-term future. I think we've already seen him and Polina strike up quite a decent partnership so far in these opening 3 games they've had together. So, yeah, it will be fascinating. I'm going to ask a favour. Georgia, can we have you for another 10, 15 minutes? Is that okay with yourself? We've got a couple of more things to go through. We're going to say a massive thank you to Jim from Oso Spurs, who has joined us. Jim has been with us for a lot of the window. He will hopefully be with us throughout again, of course, but towards the end of it. Jim, thank you ever so much. Like I say, it's been a real pleasure. Make sure you are following Jim over at Oso Spurs. Jim, thank you so much.
No, thanks, guys. Hopefully next time we're not justifying why we haven't signed anyone, and we're actually talking about a player. And thanks a lot, and have a lovely evening, everyone.
Jim, you're a superstar. Thank you so much.
Cheers.
We are going to go for that final break of the show for our listeners that are on audio. Like I said, I'm joined by George Sessions over at PA. He is that man you hear in the background that are asking the questions that we all want the answers to, of course, in Angie's presses. It was Angie's presses. It is now Thomas Frank's presses, just to be clear. And also George's part of the Tottenham Way podcast. We've got Marcus on here on a bit of a 3-month basis. Marcus comes on and gives us his views on all things Tottenham. We know, G, look, it's a really important last 2 or 3 months. 2 or 3 months. I wish it was 2 or 3 months. 2 or 3 days left for Tottenham in the window. We've discussed some tens in terms of options for Tottenham. And realistically, as we've said, that window is now getting shorter and shorter. Given what you feel is out there now for Frank to work with, what do you think the minimum would be that would be acceptable now in his final days of the window? What can we get by on? I mean, we said earlier, we don't think all 3 players are going to get done in terms of those positions of centre-back, attacking midfielder and a winger. What can he get away with in terms of still having a competitive squad over 4 competitions? Or do you think that's going to be very difficult? Do you think it has to be? They have to, in these next few days, try and bring in those key areas?
They've got to get 2 out of the 3 at least, I think. I'm sure everyone that talks about Thomas Frank says how he works so brilliantly with what he's given. He's always kind of pushing the ceiling of the squad, always able to adapt in certain situations. So I'm sure he would back himself to handle a situation where Spurs have this squad, maybe +1, hopefully not, +0. But I just think you're just setting him up to fail. We've seen this story so many times, haven't we? Especially it being Champions League. We don't want Thomas Frank to be in a situation where he has to work out whether he can prioritise playing Christian Romero and Mickey van der Ven on Wednesday or on Sunday. And I think, look, November's a horrible month, isn't it? Is it Arsenal, Chelsea, maybe Man United are in there as well, off the top of my head?
Yep.
You're going to have 2 Champions League games in there, I'm sure. Potentially Carabao Cup in there. I don't want Thomas Frank to be in a situation where you've got a Carabao Cup 5th round game and he's having to make 11 changes just because he's got Arsenal on Sunday and then he's got Real Madrid the following Wednesday. And realistically, that's going to be the case. And the squad he's going to be putting out is not going to be at the level that we need. So, I mean, Spurs have got to sign 2, to be totally honest. They should have signed 3. I think 5 first team players this summer would have been brilliant. And everyone, if they were real, Premier League proven, able to make a difference in the Champions League, everyone would be really happy with 5 players coming into the squad. On top of, I'm obviously mentioning, Paulinho and Kudos. But if it's going to be 1, 3 players added to this squad, and as I said before, we've lost Sonny. Madison's not going to barely kick a ball this summer.
No.
Kulusevski's not going to kick a ball this in 2025. It seems like, or certainly not, until December at the earliest. So, no, it's the squad couldn't cope last season. So why is it going to suddenly? There's no magic wand. Thomas Frank's not a magician, unfortunately. He will get a tune out of this squad, I'm sure. But maybe to the level of Spurs being 7th or 8th, and then going out of the Champions League in the last 16, going out of the FA Cup in the 4th round, going out of the Carabao Cup in the 5th round. I don't want that as a Spurs fan personally. I want us to actually go for these cups and really give it a go. And I'm not sure he's going to have the tools to do that if this first half of the season he's only got the squad that he's got right now.
I spoke to you, George, before the break about our inability at selling players, and I said to you, we've seen Chelsea throughout the summer really somehow obtain astronomical fees for players that really haven't even had much of a career at Chelsea. And I think, again, I can't speak for all Tottenham fans. I can only speak for some fans that feel this way, that when you see Spurs go into a negotiation, rightly so, you say they're trying to maximise and every opportunity to save as much money as possible in those negotiations. But it does feel that every negotiation with Daniel feels like it's a war. I just wonder how much those relationships that we may have broken down the years has really cost us, because that felt like that way with dealing with Parrish, that negotiation with him over Eze. I mean, I go back to even like, you remember this, Jules, even like, the Berahino at the time with Jeremy Peace and what that caused all those years ago, which did actually lead to the club pivoting away from him and bringing Sonny in, which again, many would say was a masterstroke. But how much do you think the negotiation battle with Daniel trying to always get the best possible deal for the club financially has hindered Tottenham when it comes to negotiations? Because I look at it now with, as we've said, 3 or 4 days to go, and with the quality pool getting smaller and smaller, it's becoming harder to get the deals done. You're at a race against time. And with Daniel openly admitting, I'm the one that does the negotiations, how hard does that make this to be done? Do you think there should be somebody else that's fronting these negotiations even?
Yeah, maybe there should be now. And look, you mentioned Crystal Palace and Steve Parish. Crystal Palace would have been furious that Spurs put in a big bid for Mark Gay on the final day of the January transfer window. What a time to try and take your best player, give you no absolute no time whatsoever to find a replacement. And then look, 7-8 months later, there's another deal to be made with Palace, and it's very difficult. Is that a coincidence or is that just just chance? I don't know. And even Man City, someone mentioned to me the other day, Daniel Levy said, the whole 115 charges has gone on for too long. It's just don't say that. Just don't get yourself involved in that, because when it comes to negotiating with the club, is that just going to be, in the conscience somewhere? Oh wait, so this guy was talking about our 115 charges recently. Let's stick another 5 million on it. I'm sure that's not how it goes, but it's just those kind of things just don't help. And I think we've seen it. How many times have we seen? You went through the list. Eden Hazard, Willian. So many. Joe Martinho. There's so many instances we've seen where Spurs have been negotiating, and it seems like it's got closer, and then it's fallen through. There's been lots that they obviously have done as well. There's been some brilliant deals. The Sonny one was a brilliant deal. Obviously, there's been plenty of others, but I think it is kind of telling. We are in a kind of a football and certainly a Premier League sphere where maybe people doing each other's favours is too strong, but you just see certain kind of clubs help each other. How much business have Arsenal and Chelsea done over the last few years? God knows how much, and it just they're just helping each other out when it comes to a big bit of money going into Chelsea for Kai Havertz going the other way, and then vice versa. And there's loads of clubs that have done that. There's Forest have done loads of business with Botafogo and Leon as well. Certain people just help each other out in this era where you do have financial fair play. I think Aston Villa are another one as well. It's kind of, and it does feel like, just looking from the outside, obviously we're not in these negotiations, but it does feel like no one is willing to do Spurs a favour. Certainly when it comes to selling players, it's kind of remarkable how difficult Spurs have found it to sell players. There's obviously been some high profile ones, Harry Kane to Bayern Munich, Son Heung-Min to LAFC, but plenty of other guys should have really been moved on and sold a lot earlier than they were, and they didn't. And Ndombele had to have his contract ripped up, which actually was
Brighton, Chelsea. I mean, Chelsea have raided Brighton. Chelsea have raided Brighton for, a manager, a coaching staff, technical staff, recruitment staff, and yet still this summer, Chelsea are going to Brighton and getting João Pedro from them. And you think, however they're managing, whatever you think about Todd Bowley and what he's done at Chelsea and how he's done it, that guy clearly has got a way of maintaining relationships. He's taken a manager from them. He's taken the coaching staff, the technical staff, the recruitment staff, and yet still they're willing to sell him a player. Whereas with us, negotiating with Forest for 2.5 weeks to not get the player, maybe that's again a isolated incident. The Eze saga over a week and a half. The Savinho saga, here we are 2.5 weeks on with no real understanding as to where that is at. Surely you'd have to think, George, we're recording this on the Tuesday, so we're under a week now. Surely there has to be a degree of acceleration in these next couple of days to get deals done. Otherwise, it can only get harder, can't it? The price is going to go up. Everyone knows what we've discussed. They've got 60 million plus to spend on a number 10. And as desperation goes towards the window, all these clubs we're talking about that we're linking or being linked to their players, some of them are going to want replacements. They're not just going to be openly selling them. So it gets even harder as that window drags to a close. And that's why I think a lot of Spurs fans are suffering from that PSTD thinking, we have been here before, George. We've been here so many times where we're coming to the end of a window, we need to do business. And how many times we get to the end of it and always feel we've never quite done enough, George?
Yeah, plenty of times. I think part of the issue is this kind of, I think it's a little bit of an outdated kind of tactic to run run the negotiations so close to the deadline, so that selling club is forced to sell because they have to sell the player, they have to get their money in. Obviously there is real financial fair play issues with a number of clubs, but there's also so much money in the Premier League now. Look how good Bournemouth are, look how good Crystal Palace are, Brighton, all these clubs. Maybe 5 years ago they would have been satisfied and probably snapped your hand off to finish 14th, 15th, 16th. Now there's so much money in the Premier League, and all these clubs have got access to so much great data as well, and they can offer the wages that Serie A clubs, the top Serie A clubs, can't offer. The French clubs can't offer. So there's not that kind of desperation of those clubs now to sell to Spurs for 5 million less, because if Spurs don't come in, they can sit on that and sell them again in 6 to 12 months time. So I think that I often think of that, actually, that how many deals over the last 2 or 3, 4 years can you remember Spurs doing that's really run to the deadline and it's kind of paid off for them? Matthias Tell, I guess, in January, but again that was a loan. It wasn't not like sort of talking huge money. I think Brennan Johnson, maybe Angie's first season, that was a deadline day deal. Yep. But not many of these deals kind of have to run to deadline. I mean, even the Pedro Porro, I think Pedro Porro got done on deadline day, but I'm fairly certain it was sort of almost pretty much done the day before. So it wasn't like Spurs saved loads of money by running it to the deadline. So I'm just not sure how kind of successful is that tactic these days. I'm sure 5, 6, 10 years ago it would have been really important, because money was not there wasn't as much money in the Premier League as there is now. But now the money's gone through the roof. You get so much money for finishing kind of 10th, let alone kind of 15th, 16th. So these clubs are not. There's so many clubs that just do not need to sell. There is some that obviously have financial difficulty, but a lot of them don't actually need to sell unless the price is right for them. And I think that's, you mentioned Brighton and Chelsea. Yep. The reason probably Brighton sell to Chelsea is because they stump up the money and the price is right for Brighton. And they, Brighton in particular, are a club that have a fee for a player. If you give that fee, they will sell the player. They're not going to make it difficult. That's the way it should be, really.
Yeah, I agree. I think, I say, when we come into these coming days now, I mean, there has to be some form of acceleration. For everybody out there, like, again, we're at a stalemate from what we're hearing with Savinho. It feels this one in particular, because it would be a record deal. This one, I think now, if it doesn't get done, I think fans would rightly be so angry, thinking, we've been here with 2 separate negotiations that have been long drawn out sagas. If this doesn't get done and we do not get another winger, I tell you, I don't know how the fans would take this. I mean, we know, again, for those that have missed it earlier, Bissouma is on his way to Galatasaray. That looks like it's going to be a done deal, suggesting it will be a loan with an obligation for him. There has been murmurs, again, this last 24 hours, for those that are on the playback, that Spurs are one of 3 clubs that have held talks over a deal for Adrian Rabiot. But how many times have we heard Tottenham linked with this player over the last 4, 5, 6 windows? We're going to be honest with you. Me and George spoke about it on this show with Jim as well. Lucas Paquetá, maybe he's the one that does feel would be the best profile fit for what Thomas Frank would want. But again, how keen or how easy is it going to be with those days ticking down to the deadline to go to West Ham and take arguably their best player after taking from them Mohamed Kudus? I just think that's going to be very hard to do. But then there are suggestions West Ham want to sell. George, if the squad is like this now, hypothetically, and we don't bring anybody else in, where would Tottenham, do you think, finish?
I think not the first team. I think the first team's good enough to be 5th if they only have to concentrate on 38 games this season. But unfortunately, with the kind of the grind we're going to see in the winter months, especially December, January, I struggle to see Spurs getting in the top 7. I think Spurs could be 8th with this squad. Because I look at the clubs, look at obviously the top 4 seems now and done. I think we'd all agree with that. Man United have spent so much money that you would imagine that they should get better under Ruben Amorim. So let's say they do. So they've got 5th. There's not even factoring in Aston Villa and Newcastle. who obviously were in that top 6 last season. And then that's kind of discrediting Nottingham Forest, Crystal Palace, Brighton, Bournemouth. All those sides they'll kind of want to try and kick on again. So Spurs could be in a battle with those guys. Not their starting team, as I keep saying, but Thomas Frank's going to have to make changes when he's got these 3-game weeks, and he's going to have it at least 8 times during the first 5 months of the season, and more, because he's going to have hopefully a decent Carabao Cup run. And the thing that I'm concerned with is that Spurs will have to, and I hate this, the Spurs will have to kind of deprioritise the cup competitions. It'll be beneficial for Thomas Frank to go out in the Carabao Cup 3rd round.
What worries me about that, What worries me about that, I think there was a stat. I don't think he's actually got past. It's either the 4th or 5th round of the domestic cups in the last however many years. Purely because, honestly, at Brentford, the target there has always been staying in the Premier League. But at a club like Tottenham, as you know as well as me, us Tottenham fans, we all love Tottenham. For us, I know the cup competition means everything to us. I said this the other week. We do not want to be in a situation where we are waiting another 17 years for a trophy or for a parade. Once you've tasted that success, like you've said, and you spoke to a lot of ex-players, you want more of it. And that would be my worry, the fact that the squad we can see on their day, or the team on their day, can go to a Man City and get a result like that. But like we've both said, the problem is when you look at the overall squad, once Premier League football then hits in with Champions League and the domestic cups, I think that's where we always get tested. And, we've been here before under Ange. We had, the 10 games unbeaten. I think under Nuno, we were top after 4 games. Conte, again, there's been some strong starts. But the squad does get, unfortunately, exposed to what it is. And there's no doubt that every manager in the last 4 or 5 years, even back to Pochettino, they've all said it. The squad needs to be given the right adequate players to be able to push on. And I agree with you. I think that will be my worry, that right now we are not ready for the remainder of the season, despite Frank making a great start. And again, I think he's a good coach. I think it does give me Pochettino vibes. I'm not sure if you feel like that already, George. There's a real feeling to me that already I'm feeling that we've got a coach here that really will get the best out of a lot of players that we've seen already and be able to go into games with different tactical systems that will benefit us. But all that will mean nothing if he hasn't got the squad, George, right? It's the reality.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess that's the thing. You kind of want him to be able to, to have a fair crack at the whip and to really try and go through all 4 competitions. We're not saying we expect him to win any of those competitions, but I think Spurs' starting team should think, we could go all the way in the FA Cup. We could go all the way in the Carabao Cup. We're not going to win the Premier League. Let's be totally honest, and we all know that. As much as certain people are talking about potentially trying to do it, but this squad, I just think it's once the injuries. I mean, Spurs have already got injuries, so they're missing Destiny Udogie. Obviously, James Maddison and Dejan Kulusevski are out, and Dominic Solanke was recently out.
Yep.
And look at that bench on Saturday at Man City. You got 3 teenagers there.
Yep.
Now, as much as I really like Archie Gray and Lucas Bergvall, they are still teenagers. A lot was expected of them last season, and they stepped up and they were absolutely brilliant for large parts of it. But you can't be expecting those guys to be playing, either in the Champions League, starting in the Champions League, or starting in the Premier League all the time. And if we get an injury to João Paulinho or Rodrigo Bentancur, that would be the case, wouldn't it? So that's my kind of concern, and I just kind of hope that this season can see progression clearly in the Premier League, but also Spurs really do treat the cups with the respect that they deserve. I think Ange in year 1 learnt a huge amount from kind of the way the fan base reacted to the early Carabao Cup defeat.
Agreed. Yeah.
And then he was a little bit unlucky in the FA Cup because Spurs lost to Man City at home, which clearly can happen. But I think he learned a huge amount from that, and I would sort of say 99% when it comes to him making the decision to put all the eggs in the Europa League basket, it was based on the fact that he knew how much that would mean to the fan base. He wasn't going to change the history of the club by finishing 9th, and going out in the Europa League quarterfinals. No. What would change it was winning the trophy. And now that Spurs have won the trophy, go for more, because this squad knows what it takes. Christian Romero knows what it takes to drag Tottenham over the line.
Yep.
You know, the whole core of the squad do. So you've got a real opportunity there. And I just hope Thomas Frank isn't in a situation where he's going to have to, you know, unfortunately, as we've seen Pochettino do and as we've seen Conte do, you know, I lost my rag with Conte when Spurs played Sheffield United in the FA Cup 5th round on the Wednesday.
Yep.
And he rested Harry Kane and played him away to Wolves on the Saturday. And Spurs lost at Wolves as well. They lost at Sheffield United. That was when I lost it with Conte, because an FA Cup 5th round, you know, you're 2 games away from a Wembley semi-final when you're resting your best player away to a Championship club. And, you know, as much as I was frustrated with Conte for doing that, the reason he's doing that is because the squad isn't capable of handling the multiple competitions. And that's what I don't want to happen to Thomas Frank. I don't want him to be in a situation this season where he is having to just play his strongest team in the Premier League and the Cups get, you know, he makes 6 or 7 changes and we go out early doors. But that is my concern. I think for fans, I'm sure a lot of fans would probably take 5th and going out of the Cups early. I'm not one of them. I want us to really try and kick on from this the Europa League win and use it, because it's, you know, it's such a special thing to win a competition, to know how to win a competition. Yeah. And now that this group have it, make the most of it for the next few years.
Agree. I think the thing as well is with that, I don't especially to Brentford, but you're maybe not at the back page of the head of the papers when you go out of a cup at Brentford. When you're at Tottenham, you are on the back page if you go out of a cup, because Tottenham are a club that, for fans, I mean, like me, maybe an older vintage, I think both of us, George, we want to see Spurs be successful in all cups. You know, it hurts when we go out of cups. Last season, we went out the FA Cup and the League Cup. But again, you know, we won the Europa League, and it was, for a lot of fans I know out there, meeting so many of them as well, you know, it'll be one of the, like you said, one of the greatest moments of their modern day life, you know, to go and win that trophy the way we did it, in terms of having those scenes in Bilbao, coming back to the home ground for the parade was incredible. You said, George, for you that they have to sign 2 out of the 3. Final question, gut feeling, what will they do?
I think they'll sign 1 player. And if I had to put my neck in the line, I would say Paquetá.
You don't think
I'd be happy that they sign. I'd be happy that they sign Paquetá, but I wouldn't be happy that they only sign 1 player. But
yeah,
I'm sort of starting to worry it will just be 1 player, which will make it really difficult for Thomas Frank.
It has to be a statement sign, George, it has to be a statement sign, doesn't it? It has to be.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, I don't think you can just get away now with Bilal El-Kanouche being the only player that comes in. You know, maybe they do 2 around that kind of 30, 40 million mark, and then that's 2 players that have boosted the squad, but maybe not boosted the first team. But I think that realistically, it should be a Savinho, it should be a Paquetá.
Yep.
So, you know, I'll be shocked if Spurs don't sign anyone, but I'm not hopeful that it's going to be 2. So if they sign 1, what are the expectations this season? You know, I think Thomas Frank will have a lot of good days, but he's also going to have some rough days and some tough spells, because injuries will come at some point. You know, we don't know when, but they will come at some point. I'd be stunned if Spurs manage to get through their winter period without kind of 3 or 4, you know, significant injuries, because it happens to all the clubs. It's not a Tottenham thing. It is a football thing. The calendar's crazy.
George, we've got 6 out there. We've just changed the old medical staff. I mean, it's just like only Tottenham. We're gonna have to see, because, like I say, it will be fascinating. George, it's always a pleasure to have you on. I always feel like I say to you at the end of the show, I wish you'd done better circumstances, but it is because we bring you on for you guys when we're, you know, in the windows like we are, and I know it's for you guys the busiest time, so we can't thank you enough. George, like you said, you're a regular now on the Tottenham Way. Where can we really find that on the Spurs beat? Let us know where you can find the Tottenham Way, because I think you guys have now got Marcus in makeup. He's now on the screen as well, isn't he? Where can they find you?
Yeah, we're on YouTube if you want to see our faces. The Tottenham Way Pod on YouTube, and we're obviously, you know, originally a podcast, so we're, you know, still a podcast, but we're also on Instagram and on X, on all those platforms, and my musings go on X. You know, every so often I'll put something interesting out. You know, 75% of the time it's probably a bit boring, but 25% is a little bit interesting.
Mate, it's always a pleasure. Thank you for keeping it real. Like I say, I've known you for, like I say, nearly a decade, bless you. And it's always a weird one. I think, like, you and Ali, you know, if you don't mind me saying this, you and Ali are both cover the club and are both fans of the club, which again is an interesting one, because I know for both of you still love the club so much dear to your heart, but at the same time you're having to report on it. So it's one of those where you've got to try and remove the emotion, but at the same time, deep down there's always that Spurs core when you're at the ground that you want to probably punch the air, but you're kind of looking around thinking, is anybody looking at me? So
I've done a sort of clenched fist under the desktop table quite a lot of times, and yeah, tears rolling in Bilbao at that full-time whistle. So not ashamed to admit that. But no, thanks so much for having me on, mate. It's always it's nice to come on and kind of speak a bit more in a fan capacity, rather than needing to obviously be super objective. So thanks for inviting me back on, and look forward to being back on in January when we're top of the league and we're going for the Champions League as well. We can dream, can't we?
Wouldn't that be the dream? Listen, and thank you to the 12,500 that have been watching the show live. Thank you so much for incredible support for Last Word on Spurs. Look, we're at that point now where really, as me and George have said, it's getting close to the wire. And if Tottenham are going to be getting these deals done, they've got to accelerate quickly. Will they get a deal over the line for Savinho? That currently looks like it's at pretty much standstill. Bissouma's on his way out. Does that help potentially having a potential squad place available? We shall see. A massive thank you to the wonderful Dual Sessions from PA. And a massive thank you again to Jim that came and joined us earlier as well. Listen, we'll keep you posted as always with all the latest news. But Spurs haven't got much time. They need to act fast. From myself, from George, guys, thank you so much for all your incredible support. Keep liking the show, keep subscribing. And as always, come on you Spurs.